In the golden light of dawn, Hayes Thornhill began his morning chores at Silver Mist Ranch. 3 generations of Thornhills had raised horses on this land, but times had changed. Development crept closer each year, and the once thriving operation had dwindled to just 4 aging quarter horses and mounting debts. Lost in thought about his uncertain future, Hayes noticed an unusual sound, persistent thumping against the fence posts marking his eastern boundary. Cresting a small rise, he stopped in his tracks. There, pacing anxiously along his fence, was a magnificent wild Mustang stallion. The dun-colored horse had primitive markings with a striking black stripe running down his spine. "Where did you come from?" Hayes murmured, maintaining his distance. The ranch bordered federal land where wild horses roamed, but in 15 years, Hayes had never seen one approach his property. Wild Mustangs were notoriously wary of humans. The stallion's head shot up at Hayes's voice. Rather than bolting, the horse fixed him with an intense stare, then resumed his agitated movements with greater urgency. He pawed the ground and repeatedly tossed his head toward the distant hills. Against better judgment, Hayes moved closer. The stallion, mentally dubbed Sage by Hayes, continued his strange behavior, alternating between approaching the fence and retreating, always looking back toward the eastern hills. "What's got you so worked up?" Hayes asked softly. Sage approached the fence directly, reached his neck across, and gently pushed against Hayes's shoulder with his muzzle. Then he backed away and stared meaningfully eastward once more. 15 years working with horses had taught Hayes to read equine body language, but this was beyond anything he'd experienced. The wild stallion wasn't acting aggressive or fearful. He seemed to be trying to communicate something specific. Hayes saddled his reliable mount, an aging gray quarter horse named Maverick. As they rode toward the fence line, Sage's agitation visibly increased. The moment Hayes opened the gate separating his property from public land, Sage broke into a trot, moving a short distance before stopping and looking back, clearly waiting for Hayes to follow. "This is crazy," Hayes muttered, but he urged Maverick forward. Sage led Hayes across rugged terrain for nearly 2 miles, occasionally circling back when Hayes fell too far behind. When they crested a rocky outcropping, Sage increased his pace, disappearing into a small hidden ravine below. Hayes guided Maverick carefully down the steep trail. What he saw when he reached the bottom stole his breath away. There, lying on her side in obvious distress, was a beautiful black mare, heavy with foal. Her sides heaved with labored breathing, and even to Hayes's eye, it was clear something was terribly wrong with her labor. Sage rushed to the mare's side, gently nuzzling her neck before turning to look at Hayes with an unmistakable plea in his intelligent eyes. In that moment, Hayes understood with perfect clarity. This wild stallion had sought human help as a last resort to save his dying mate. Hayes dismounted quickly, his mind racing. The black mare's condition was critical. Her breathing labored, her body occasionally shuddering with painful contractions. Sage stood nearby, his attention divided between the suffering mare and Hayes, as if gauging whether his desperate gamble on human intervention would pay off. "I'm not a vet," Hayes said aloud. He'd assisted with countless foalings on his ranch, but never with a wild Mustang in the middle of nowhere, and certainly never in a case this complicated. The mare merely rolled her eyes toward him, too exhausted to protest his presence. Hayes knelt beside her, running gentle hands over her distended belly. The foal was positioned incorrectly, a breech birth, possibly with a leg turned back. Without intervention, both mare and foal would die. Hayes pulled out his cell phone only to find no signal in the ravine. He faced a brutal choice: leave to get help, knowing the mare might die while he was gone, or attempt to handle the situation himself. The mare's next contraction made the decision for him. A painful whinny tore from her throat, and Hayes saw a tiny hoof emerge, then recede. But it was a rear hoof, confirming his fear. "Okay, girl. We're doing this together," he said softly, removing his outer shirt to create a cleaner surface for his hands. What happened next would remain etched in Hayes's memory forever. As he positioned himself to assist, Sage moved to the mare's head. The stallion stretched out beside her, positioning his body so her head could rest against his neck, offering comfort through touch. Working with careful precision, Hayes reached into the birth canal, feeling for the foal's position. One rear leg was properly positioned, but the other was folded back, preventing the birth from progressing. With gentle pressure, he located the misaligned leg and carefully worked to straighten it. The mare groaned but remained surprisingly still, as if understanding his efforts to help. Sage maintained his position, occasionally making soft nickering sounds that seemed to soothe her. Finally, Hayes managed to align both rear legs. "Come on, little one," he urged, applying careful traction with each contraction. After what seemed like hours but was perhaps only 40 minutes, the foal began to emerge properly. First the rear legs, then the hips, body, and finally, with one last powerful contraction, the head and front legs slipped free. A perfect black filly with a star-shaped white mark on her forehead lay motionless on the ground. Hayes's heart sank. He quickly cleared the foal's nostrils and mouth, then vigorously rubbed her tiny body to stimulate breathing. "Come on," he whispered. "Come on." Just when Hayes was about to lose hope, the filly's chest heaved, and she drew her first breath. A moment later, she raised her head slightly, blinking in confusion. The mare struggled to rise. Hayes helped support her until she managed to stand on trembling legs. Within minutes, she began cleaning her newborn with gentle licks. Sage approached cautiously, stretching his neck to sniff the tiny filly. His ears swiveled forward in apparent approval before he turned to Hayes. The wild stallion approached slowly, maintaining eye contact. When he reached Hayes, he lowered his head in what could only be described as a gesture of gratitude. Hayes remained frozen, hardly daring to breathe during this unprecedented interaction. After several seconds, Sage raised his head and returned to his family, positioning himself protectively nearby as the newborn filly made her first wobbly attempts to stand. 3 days after the miraculous birth, Hayes found himself unable to stay away. Each morning and evening, he rode out to the hidden ravine, bringing water and sweet feed for the new mother. He maintained a respectful distance, observing but never approaching too closely. The mare, whom he'd named Ember for her fiery spirit, was recovering well. Her foal, now called Lyra for the star marking on her forehead, grew stronger daily. Sage maintained his vigilant protection, but remarkably, he seemed to recognize Hayes as an ally rather than a threat. On the 4th day, Hayes arrived to find the small family gone. A mixture of disappointment and relief washed over him. This was the natural order. Wild horses belonged in the wilderness. He was about to turn Maverick homeward when he spotted movement on the ridge above. There stood Sage, Ember, and tiny Lyra, watching him. After a moment, they disappeared over the ridge, returning to their wild lives. Hayes thought that would be the end of his extraordinary encounter. He was wrong. 1 week later, as Hayes repaired fencing on his eastern boundary, a familiar figure appeared on the horizon. Sage approached cautiously, this time without his family, stopping at a distance that maintained his freedom but allowed for observation. For nearly an hour, the wild stallion watched Hayes work. Just before departing, Sage approached closer than ever before, stopping just 30 feet away. The Mustang stood tall, studied Hayes intently, then turned and galloped away. This pattern continued over the following weeks. Sage would appear every few days, always alone, watching Hayes's activities from an increasingly closer vantage point. Hayes began to look forward to these visits, talking aloud to the horse as he worked, explaining the ranch's financial troubles and his uncertainty about the future. Talking to a wild horse, Hayes chuckled one evening. Maybe I've been alone too long. The situation changed dramatically on a stormy autumn afternoon. Hayes was securing the barn when he heard urgent whinnying from the eastern fence. He emerged to find Sage there, more agitated than he'd seen him since their first encounter. "What is it, boy?" Hayes called over the rising wind. The stallion paced anxiously, displaying the same communication behaviors he'd shown the day of Lyra's birth. Despite the darkening sky and first heavy raindrops, Hayes saddled Maverick and followed Sage deeper into the wilderness. When they crested a hill overlooking a broad valley, Hayes understood the cause of Sage's distress. Below them, a roundup was in progress. A helicopter darted low over the landscape, herding terrified Mustangs toward temporary corrals. Sage's family, including Ember and Lyra, had been captured and were now contained in the metal pens. The tiny filly pressed against her mother in fear as workers moved among the horses. Hayes's heart sank. Though controversial, these roundups were legal and, according to officials, necessary for land management. Yet the desperate plea in Sage's eyes made clear what the stallion was asking. "I can't just demand they release them," Hayes explained helplessly. Sage paced anxiously, looking from Hayes to his captured family and back again. The stallion had done the impossible once, approached a human for help against all his wild instincts. Now he was doing it again, displaying a level of trust that humbled Hayes to his core. Hayes watched the roundup operation, racking his brain for a solution. The stallion beside him pawed the ground impatiently, sensing Hayes's hesitation. An idea struck him, a risky, possibly illegal idea. Hayes remembered his grandfather mentioning a provision in the Wild Horse and Burro Act about owners reclaiming horses that had strayed onto public lands. It was a long shot, but Hayes approached the operations supervisor, introducing himself as the owner of the neighboring ranch. "That black mare and her foal," Hayes said, pointing toward Ember and Lyra. "They're not wild horses. They wandered off my property after the foal was born." The supervisor looked skeptical. "You got any proof of ownership?" Hayes took a deep breath. "The foal has a distinctive star marking. I have documentation back at my ranch. I helped with the birth myself when she was having complications." This wasn't entirely a lie. The supervisor studied Hayes's face, then looked at the black mare and her unusual foal. "That little one is awful young to be going through this stress," the man finally said. "If you can bring documentation showing the mare belongs to you, we can release them." "And the stallion," Hayes added quickly. "The dun with primitive markings. He's their sire, part of my small private herd." The supervisor's eyes narrowed. "3 horses. That's a big request." "I have all the documentation," Hayes insisted, praying his confidence masked his deception. After tense negotiation, the supervisor agreed to hold the 3 horses separately until Hayes returned with proof. As Hayes rode back to create the documentation, he felt Sage following at a distance, as if understanding a plan was in motion. 2 hours later, Hayes returned with carefully created records showing ownership of all 3 horses. He'd added weathering to the papers and included old photos of similar-looking horses from his grandfather's program. Whether the supervisor truly believed him or simply decided the paperwork was sufficient to cover his liability, Hayes couldn't tell. But as sunset approached, 3 Mustangs were loaded into Hayes's borrowed trailer instead of government transport vehicles. As they drove away, Hayes could hardly believe what he'd done. He'd just committed fraud against a federal agency to save 3 wild horses who, by law, weren't his to claim. The question now was what would he do with them once he got them home? He parked near his old round pen and opened the trailer doors. Ember and Lyra moved directly into the enclosure, clearly preferring the open space to the trailer's confines. Sage was another matter. The proud stallion remained in the trailer, eyeing Hayes warily. Had Hayes betrayed the wild horse's trust by bringing him into captivity? "You're free to go if that's what you want," Hayes said softly. "I'll leave the trailer open tonight. Stay or go. It's your choice." He secured the round pen gate, ensuring Ember and Lyra's safety, but left the trailer doors open, offering Sage a path back to the wilderness. Morning light revealed the choice Sage had made. The trailer stood empty, but the stallion hadn't fled to the wilderness. Instead, he stood just outside the round pen, as close as possible to his family while maintaining his freedom. When Hayes approached with water and hay, Sage backed away to a watchful distance but didn't run. His eyes followed Hayes's every move as he cared for Ember and Lyra. Over the following days, a routine developed. The mare and foal grew comfortable with Hayes's presence, while Sage maintained his vigilant position outside the pen, gradually allowing Hayes to come closer before retreating. 2 weeks into this arrangement, a government SUV rolled up his drive. A woman in a Bureau of Land Management uniform stepped out. "Mr. Thornhill? I'm Agent Serena Walcott. We need to discuss the Mustangs you claimed at the recent gather." Hayes's stomach dropped. Had his deception been discovered? "I've reviewed your documentation," she continued, studying his face, "and something seemed unusual. So I did some research into your family's history with horses." Hayes braced himself for handcuffs. "Your grandfather Elias Thornhill was one of the first advocates for humane treatment of wild horses in this region," she said instead. He worked with the BLM to develop better management practices back in the 70s. Hayes nodded cautiously. He believed they deserved respect. Agent Walcott looked toward the round pen where Lyra was nursing. That's a special foal, and the bond between that stallion and mare is remarkable. Most captured stallions don't adjust well to captivity. She turned back to Hayes. I have a proposal. The BLM is launching a new program, a sanctuary system for select Mustang family bands to be studied and protected. We need private ranchers willing to partner with us, providing land where these horses can live relatively freely while allowing research and educational access. Hayes stared at her, speechless. Your ranch would be perfect, especially given your family history with these animals. The BLM would provide funding for fencing, water systems, and basic maintenance. You'd receive a stipend as a program manager. Why are you offering this? Hayes asked. If you suspect my documentation isn't perfect. Agent Walcott smiled slightly. Let's just say sometimes bending the rules for the right reasons deserves recognition rather than punishment. Besides, that little filly needs stability, not a government holding facility. By sunset, Hayes sat on his porch with a signed preliminary agreement. His failing ranch would become Silver Mist Wild Horse Sanctuary, a safe haven not just for Sage's family but potentially dozens of other Mustangs that would otherwise face uncertain futures. As darkness fell, Hayes walked to the round pen. Ember and Lyra rested peacefully inside, while Sage stood his usual watch nearby. This time, when Hayes approached, the wild stallion didn't retreat. We did it, boy, Hayes said softly. Your family is safe, and you've saved this ranch too. Sage extended his muzzle toward Hayes's outstretched hand, not quite touching but closer than ever before. A bridge between two worlds, built on trust and an impossible plea for help that had changed everything. 6 months transformed Silver Mist Ranch beyond recognition. New fencing extended the sanctuary to cover over 300 acres, with natural water sources enhanced to support the growing herd. 15 more Mustangs had joined Sage's family, all rescued from holding facilities or scheduled roundups. Hayes, now officially the sanctuary's manager, had embraced his new purpose with surprising passion. Working alongside BLM biologists and equine behavior specialists, he helped document the complex social structures and communication patterns of the Mustang bands. Lyra, now a lanky 6-month-old, had become the sanctuary's unofficial ambassador. Unlike most Mustang foals born in captivity, she showed no fear of humans, perhaps remembering on some level that a human had helped bring her into the world. Her curious, friendly nature made her a favorite when school groups visited. Ember remained more cautious but accepted Hayes's presence without anxiety. And Sage. The proud stallion had established an extraordinary relationship with Hayes based on mutual respect. Though still unmistakably wild, he would now approach within arm's reach, occasionally accepting apple slices from Hayes's open palm. The most remarkable development came in the form of visitors. Word of the sanctuary and its unusual founding story had spread through social media and equine conservation circles. People traveled from across the country to witness the Mustang family that had sought human help and found a champion. On a crisp spring morning, Hayes guided a special tour, a group of government officials considering expanding the sanctuary program nationwide. Among them was Senator Eliza Crawford, chair of the committee overseeing public lands. The research being conducted here is changing how we understand these animals, Hayes explained as they observed the herd from a respectful distance. They're not just random bands of feral horses. They have complex family bonds, problem-solving abilities, and emotional intelligence we're only beginning to comprehend. Senator Crawford nodded thoughtfully. I've been on the fence about wild horse management for years. The current system isn't working for anyone, not the ranchers, not the environmentalists, and certainly not the horses. As if on cue, Sage appeared on a nearby ridge, Lyra prancing playfully at his side. The stallion surveyed the visitors, then did something that left the officials murmuring in amazement. He began walking directly toward the group, the young filly following trustingly. Stay very still, Hayes advised quietly. This is extremely unusual behavior. Sage approached within 20 feet of the officials, close enough for them to see the intelligence in his eyes. Lyra, emboldened by her sire's confidence, ventured even closer, her star marking gleaming in the sunlight. "My God," Senator Crawford whispered. "She's beautiful." For several breathtaking minutes, the wild horses regarded the humans who would decide the fate of their kind throughout the western states. Then, with a soft nicker, Sage turned away, Lyra reluctantly following. The senator was silent for a long moment after they departed. "I've been working on public lands issues for 15 years, she finally said. "I've heard every argument on both sides, but I've never seen anything like this, like them." 1 month later, the American Wild Horse Conservation Act was introduced with bipartisan support. The bill proposed a network of sanctuaries modeled after Silver Mist, a gradual end to mass roundups, and dedicated funding for research into Mustang behavior and humane management practices. When Hayes saw the news, he walked to the eastern pasture where it had all begun. Sage stood there as if waiting for him, Ember and Lyra grazing nearby. "You knew exactly what you were doing, didn't you?" Hayes said softly. "Finding me that day, bringing me to Ember, coming back when they were captured." The Mustang regarded him steadily, wild and proud yet somehow connected across the species divide. "You've changed everything," Hayes told him. "Not just for your family, but for all of them." In response, Sage did something unprecedented. He stepped forward and gently pressed his forehead against Hayes's shoulder for just a moment before backing away. A gesture of trust, of connection, of gratitude. The message couldn't have been clearer if he'd spoken in human words. 5 years later, Hayes stood on the observation deck of the Silver Mist Visitor Center, watching as a group of international researchers documented the behavior of the sanctuary's newest foal. What had begun with one desperate stallion seeking help for his mate had blossomed into a revolutionary program that had transformed wild horse management across the American West. The network of sanctuaries now protected over 5,000 Mustangs, allowing family bands to remain together while providing opportunities for scientific study and public education. The research conducted at Silver Mist had led to groundbreaking discoveries about equine intelligence, emotional bonds, and communication. Findings that challenged humans to reconsider their relationship with these magnificent creatures. Lyra, now a beautiful mare in her own right, had become something of a celebrity. Her unusual comfort with humans made her an ideal subject for studies on Mustang cognition. Scientists had documented her solving complex puzzles, recognizing herself in mirrors, and even appearing to comprehend basic symbolic language, abilities once thought beyond equine capacity. Ember remained in the sanctuary, though age had begun to silver her muzzle. And Sage, the remarkable stallion who had started it all, still led his band with dignity, though he now tolerated the presence of younger stallions who would one day take his place. The most meaningful change, perhaps, was in how people viewed these animals. No longer dismissed as mere feral livestock, wild Mustangs had come to be recognized as intelligent beings worthy of protection and respect. School curriculums nationwide included their story as examples of conservation success and the unexpected depths of animal consciousness. As Hayes watched the researchers at work, he felt a familiar presence approach. He turned to find Sage standing just behind him, having quietly left his band to visit the observation area, something he did occasionally, always on his own terms. "Hello, old friend," Hayes said softly. The stallion's coat had faded somewhat with age, but his eyes remained bright with the same intelligence that had led him to seek human help all those years ago. "They're writing a book about you, you know," Hayes told him. "About how one Mustang changed how we see all of you." Sage's ears flicked forward as if listening intently. For a moment, they stood in companionable silence, a man and a wild horse who had somehow bridged the ancient divide between their kinds. Later that day, as the sun set over the sanctuary, Hayes watched from a distance as Sage rejoined his band. Lyra approached her sire, now leading her own foal, a dun colt with the same star marking she bore. The circle continued, wisdom passed from one generation to the next. And in that peaceful moment, Hayes understood the most profound lesson Sage had taught him, that compassion could flow in both directions across the species barrier, and that sometimes the most extraordinary bonds form when we recognize the intelligence and feeling in another being's eyes. "Thank you," he whispered toward the distant horses, knowing they couldn't hear but speaking the words anyway. "For the ranch saved from bankruptcy. For the purpose found in middle age. For the legacy that would outlive them all." As if in response, Sage raised his head and looked directly toward Hayes across the distance. Then he turned away, leading his family toward the shelter of the valley as darkness fell.